What's going on, folks? Happy Revenge of the 5th. Sorry I missed stuff on Star Wars Day yesterday, but we did the bit with the hat. So let's talk about today's Valiant Friday. For those of you who are unfamiliar, again, we used to have Cobalt Press's Black Flag Fridays. They changed the names to Tales of the Valiant, so we've shifted from Black Flag Fridays to Valiant Fridays. Once a month, we receive a new playtest packet, which I covered earlier in the week. I'll probably have a follow-up video to that based on some of your feedback. But we also receive a design diary as well once a month post-release of that playtest. So we have design diary number 3 came out today on Valiant Friday to kind of talk about what's going on and what the design process was behind some of the changes you may have witnessed in the playtest packet itself. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. So it says playtesting is one of the processes where all things are possible until it's suddenly clear that they aren't. As a designer, I use playtest documents to find out where a design space is itching for improvement and what are untouchable. Okay, so where does that lead Tales of the Valiant monsters? All monster design evolve over time, even for a system as refined and as well-loved as 5e, which we're obviously seeing with the adjustments to the 2024 rulebook and things as they are anyway. So as I started kicking around ideas for monsters in Tales of the Valiant, I was looking for ways to keep all the elements that worked in 5e and build on those. So Playtest Packet 3, which is monsters, builds on that. There are also one or two red lines I didn't want to cross. Things to keep. First of all, let's be clear that we're keeping the core of D&D traditions. All Tales of the Valiant RPG monsters built on the D&D Creative Commons retain the original challenge rating that they have in 5e. This makes a huge difference when running 5e adventures with TOV characters. Any SRD monster is a simple substitution. Okay, so that's something. I didn't actually do a deep dive. We're going to do that in a future video where we're going to probably call out a couple of like iconic monsters, as it were, and do a side-by-side comparison of the Tales of the Valiant version versus the SRD version and see where things change and where we think that's a good call. Second, TOV monsters keep the same armor class, saving throws, and largely movement. The monster actions and attacks will be very familiar. Creatures might have a new option in addition to their trusty standard actions, but overall we're not reinventing what an orc or a dragon is about. So for those of you who are worried about it due to the way it's going to be backwards compatible, challenge rating will remain the same. And this is honestly a lot of what we're seeing from Wizards of the Coast as well. They're updating their monsters, but they're being... restricted doesn't seem like the right word, but basically they're keeping challenge ratings the same. They're just better balancing those challenge ratings. So if you have a monster that currently exists in the 2014 version or the existing versions of D&D that is a challenge rating 5, if you want whatever you're making in the future to be truly backwards compatible, whether that be the 5e revision or Tales of the Valiant, the simplest way to ensure backwards compatibility is if you're running an adventure or something like that and the monster calls for a challenge rating 5 monster, you don't have to be like, okay, well, I would use a young red dragon for this challenge rating 5. I know that's not their challenge rating, but let's just say it is. But I can only use the 2014 Player's Handbook or 2014 Monster Manual because in Tales of the Valiant, it's a challenge rating 6, and in 5e Revision 2024, it's a challenge rating 7. So you're kind of hampered and constrained, maybe is the right word, I'm not sure, with the challenge rating. But what they're doing on both sides of the house is adjusting what you see within those stat blocks to make things more representative of the challenge rating. So if you were to design any adventures going forward that require a challenge rating 5 monster, you could say, okay, now you actually have multiple versions to pick from, but you'll know that, like, again, I think we can all agree that there is a large disparity between things in the 2014 Monster Manual and the challenge rating. I've done a couple of top 10 videos here on the channel of monsters that are very low challenge rating that are arguably more deadly than higher level challenge rating monsters, even if the party were to face them when they're well past, like a challenge rating 1 monster that's more dangerous to a party of level 4s than a level 4, a challenge rating 4 monster kind of a thing. So that's an interesting concept that we're seeing. So we'll have to see what that looks like ultimately. And again, apparently in Tales of the Valiant, we're also keeping armor class saving throws in most movements. Also, I am digging this new red dragon art that we're seeing here. But all right, third, the variety should be a larger set of the core. With Project Black Flag, we are keeping all the monsters from the D&D Creative Commons, as you can see from both the inclusion of Goblin, Mimic, Red Dragon, Ogre, Pegasus, and so forth. And honestly, that's probably going to be a lot of the ones we do the side-by-side comparisons of, just to check. But beyond that, you'll find entirely new creatures like the Husk Demon and the Starcrow to add a new layer of fantasy to your adventures. And we did talk about those. We kind of called them out specifically when we did our previous review of the monsters because those were the unique ones. So it was kind of a blend of 5e, Tales of the Valiant version of SRD creatures as well as some originals. So a lot of what you'll see in the playtest version is super familiar. At the same time, we're expanding the monster lineup with new ideas about presentation, options to speed up play, and ways to give monsters more interesting choices, which brings us to 4 new options. Currently, the public is playtesting the monsters in Playtest Packet 3, and here are the changes under review as part of playtest feedback. Here's the first 4 biggest design tweaks are intended to do. I'm thinking this is their new gelatinous cube art, which I like. I like the green, kind of the 5e gelatinous cube is more on the blue or almost... I have one right here. It's like a blue or almost like clearish design. And I think that's because they want it to be like transparent so you could in theory like walk into one, or if this was submerged in water you wouldn't know. I just like the green design. I think it looks, I don't know, just better. I don't know. All right, flat damage. The most obvious change to monsters is that creatures get a single number for damage rather than variable rolled damage. Flat damage has been part of D&D for about 20 years, and its popularity has grown over time. Its advantage is that it removes some burden from the GM, providing a quicker, cleaner combat where there are a lot of attack rolls. Frankly, a lot of the joy of variable damage comes from players rolling their dice more than GMs rolling for monsters. For the harried GM, flat damage speeds up large group combat considerably. However, I expect some groups will cry heresy, that's why we're testing it. Early feedback is telling us what we should keep, and early feedback is telling us that we should keep it like we do now with both flat and variable damage. There's still time to weigh in on this one. So that's a thing, right? And you know, you may notice this, that like every time you look at a stat block, even the existing stuff from 2014, it says hit, and then it has a number, and then in parentheses it has dice. And the reason why is you're supposed to either roll the dice to get it randomly, or just use the static number. And it's funny, and I do want to call this, I mean, we might make a separate video on this just to get your opinion, but I used to prefer the dice, right? Rolling the dice, because in my head, it provided the swing, right? I could roll really well on my dice and injure this player significantly. However, I could also roll very poorly, and that keeps them in the fight more. And that was my justification in my head, was if this damage does a flat 10 damage, they know they're going to get hit with 10 damage every turn. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that, but I could roll maybe 5, and then like what would have possibly been a fatal blow to them keeps them in the fight a little bit longer, and they don't get into the repetition of like, what's the damage going to be this time kind of a thing. You know what I mean? So if I tell you you're going to take 10 damage, and then I hit your partner and you hear your party member is going to get 10 damage, and the third party member gets 10 damage, then everybody knows if they hit me again, I'm going to take 10 damage. And they start, it's not metagaming per se, but they start looking at their hit points and like, I can't take another hit like that. Now, realistically, if I was rolling the dice randomly, maybe I take them out now in one shot because I just roll real well. Or maybe maybe they could survive a hit like that if I roll really poorly. And there's something about the terror of the shaking of the big ball of dice behind the DM screen and that click clack as they all drop, and the players are with that whole like, that sounds like a lot of dice. You know, that's kind of a fun tension building mechanic, and there's actually nothing stopping you from just rolling a big ball of dice behind the screen and choosing a static number anyway. But as time has gone on, I've found myself coming in favor of the static damage numbers in general, because especially if it's a creature that does a significant amount of damage, and if you're not having a great rolling night, or just in general, if I can be like, hell, you're going to take 20 points of damage, then they can kind of get... I think it might actually help the players manage more and might make things seem more tense. I don't know. I'm curious on your opinion. We'll make a separate video. But I think I'm leaning more into the flat damage rather than the roll damage. And as stated, it also does speed up the combat a pretty significant amount by taking that aspect away from the DM. All right. Low CR hit points. Many experienced GMs already know about this. Monsters with CR 1 or less often have so few hit points they barely register as speed bumps. Sometimes that's okay. However, many/most DMs routinely add a pile of hit points to standard 5e monsters. I do this myself. Some house rule it with 50% more HP, some double HP, and others have their own take on keeping lower CR creatures challenging. Some of the Tome of Beast monsters, which are built to a slightly tougher curve. Some use Tome of Beasts, which is true. I usually do, or I bump up the hit points. I look at whatever the hit point maximum would be, and sometimes just give them the maximum number of hit points they'd have for the challenge rating. Our design goal here is to make SRD monsters match the Tome of Beast monsters' power curve so that orcs, goblins, and giant scorpions provide a better challenge. Try them out and see what you think of old favorites moved into the Tome of Beast's power curve. I love this new owlbear art, by the way. Doom points. This is something I enjoy standardizing a bit. The new Doom point mechanic gives powerful creatures and boss monsters a way to add drama and to throw a wrench in heroic plans. Doom points can provide a monster's odds on the attack, can provide disadvantage on a saving throw, or empower certain rare one-time abilities. The goal here is a design that is somewhat like key points for monks combined with legendary actions in a way that works across monster design as a whole. At the table, Doom points give every GM a chance to say, "Wahaha, your Doom is close." Look at some of the dragons and other boss monsters in Playtest Packet number 3, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Big monsters deserve their moment in the spotlight. And that is true, and that's the reason why I feel like a lot of people, even if it's not necessarily low CR monsters, hit point pools get added to monsters because, like, you're like, okay, the party took him out in literally a turn. And it's like, well, now my big boss evil guy, you guys just slayed him in a turn. I want him to at least do one thing. So you just fake a number of hit points to say, like, okay, well, at least let them do their one cool thing that I want them to do. And then the party can kill them. So the Doom points kind of helps with that too. Stealth and perception. This is probably my personal favorite. The rules around stealth and surprise can be complex or sore points, so the new Tales of the Valiant stat blocks bring them up a notch. Monster stat lists them in a straightforward, visible way to make it easier for monsters to sneak and ambush and to improve the use of surprise and stealth by heroes as well. More to come on this, but TOV seeks to make stealth a larger and easier element of gameplay. Even more. Yes, there's a lot more to discover in the Monsters playtest, but that's for you and your players to discover. The feedback form of Monster playtest is open for another week and a bit, so give the monsters a read, roll some dice with your characters you make from Playtest Packet 1 and 2, and let us know what hit, misses, and what surprises you. So, there you go, folks. That's kind of all of the things that they called out there are the things that I did sort of notice on my read through, right? Was the flat damage, the lower CR hit points, boosting stuff for like the bugbear, I think got a significant amount of hit points. The Doom points are a really cool mechanic that I like, and I really like the simplicity of the stealth and perception just scores in the stat block. So I think it simplifies things where simplification could be needed, but it doesn't oversimplify things. And I think that is truly a good move, right? Cut the fat where you can and limit the amount of time that's taken trying to figure out rules, rolling stealth checks, finding damage numbers. You cut some of that back, you get the gameplay to run a little bit smoother, but you're not overly simplifying the game to the point where it's not as tactically fun. And I think a lot of people here, they see things from different, whether it's WotC or Cobalt Press, things saying like, oh, they're doing this to simplify the game. And they're like, oh, they're oversimplifying a game that's already so simple. You're going to have people who are going to disagree with everything no matter what anyway. That's one thing you learn just being a creator. But I don't think, like I said, they're doing it in a negative way. I think they're cutting out complication where there doesn't need to be complication. And then ultimately it'll come down to what ultimately shakes out by the end of this whole thing. So, I don't know. I'm curious what your thoughts are. Like I said, I have a couple of follow-up videos based on a lot of the stuff we've seen. I'm going to have a video coming out on playtests in general. I'm going to have a video coming out on flat damage versus variable damage, things like that. There's a lot of interesting things that these recent playtests between both WotC and Cobalt Press have stirred in me as kind of topics for videos to make. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on this design diary. Let me know in the comments down below. I'll see you all next time.